Next on KQED Newsroom, income inequality front and center again, while new cuts to the federal food stamp program are likely. UC President Janet Napolitano leads the U.S. Olympic delegation to Sochi, Russia, and talks about the tension surrounding this year's Winter Games.
All security precautions that can be taken are being taken in a world where there are no guarantees.
And drought politics, plans to restore the San Joaquin River under fire by Republican lawmakers.
Good evening and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. President Obama made resolving income inequality the cornerstone of his State of the Union address this week.
Today, after 4 years of economic growth, corporate profits and stock prices have rarely been higher, and those at the top have never done better. But average wages have barely budged. Inequality has deepened.
But low-income families may face another hurdle. Cuts to food stamps are expected as part of the new farm bill passed by the House. Joining me now to discuss the impact for California are Aimee Allison, Senior Vice President of PowerPAC, a social justice advocacy organization; Tom Vacar, Consumer Editor for KTVU News; and Joe Garofoli, Wealth and Politics Reporter for the San Francisco Chronicle. Joe, let's turn to you. Why did the president highlight income inequality, and how does that issue play out in the Bay Area?
Well, this is something he's talked about sort of in the background for years, and this puts it on the national map. Now, he's going to have a tough time getting this through Congress. The Congress is gridlocked. Republicans are not necessarily on board with them on this. But Californians in the fall are going to have a chance to vote on this issue and several ballot measures that are coming up. You're going to have the minimum wage is likely to be on there. You're going to have an oil severance tax is likely to be on there. And you're going to have another measure that could cap the pay of hospital executives. So that all plays to kind of that wealth inequality situation that the president talked about.
So your message here seems to be, don't look to Washington. They're not going to be able to help us here in California.
You can look there, but you're not going to get a lot of policy out of them this year. Not in an election year, and not how gridlocked that they are.
And there's only so much that a president can do through executive orders. I mean, when President Obama in State of the Union address said, I'm going to use the stroke of a pen to do as much as I can, everyone acknowledged that there was only so much that he could do in terms of helping to directly address income inequality. But at the local and at the state level, an issue like minimum wage can get done. Look here in the Bay Area. San Jose most recently raised their minimum wage. San Francisco's wages are already higher. And in the East Bay, there's nascent political discussions about raising a minimum wage on the ballot in Oakland and Berkeley and some other East Bay cities. So the minimum wage is one very concrete thing that local municipalities as well as the state can tackle, and it has a very real impact on the lowest income earners in the state.
But look where we began. We talk about income inequality. It's almost as though it's etched in stone that women make 23% less than males do. That's across the board. That's without getting into any of the other issues of unemployment, education. That's where we start. So the whole idea of income inequality is almost deeply rooted in the American experience, and until that is completely eviscerated, a lot of these other issues are going to remain very contentious because you can point the finger at somebody. Women are going to have to take the lead in this, or it's likely not to succeed.
Well, yeah, and we're looking at it, 2014 and 2016 in the political front, you see so many women stepping up in leadership who are openly talking about the issues of fairness and equal pay. I think for this reason, because if women are paid equally, then you take a big chunk out of the income inequality problem that we're facing.
Well, in the meantime, we have another issue here, and that is this problem may very well be exacerbated with the passage of the Farm Bill. The House passed it, the Senate may take it up Monday, but already they're talking about $8 billion in cuts to the food stamp program if this goes through. How is the face of who's receiving food stamp assistance in California changing?
I went to the food bank distribution at a church over in Concord and talked to a guy who's been there 15 years handing out food. He said it used to be that it was the homeless and it was single parents. Now we know as a matter of statistical reality that the dominant recipients of food stamps are families, households, where the head of the household is of working age. It is a remarkable change. It shows you how the middle class of America, and certainly in the Bay Area, is being chipped away at in such a way that most of the chips are falling to the poor side, very few going up.
Right.
Well, and it's not just a degree that will help you. It won't save you just because of the realities of, and that's where we get back to the minimum wage, where we have people who work full time and are still under the federal poverty line, who certainly in San Francisco and other parts of the Bay Area, can't pay the basic needs of housing and food.
And I guarantee you, if they're getting food stamps, I guarantee you they are also going to the food bank. Those are the two last things that they have. And food banks will tell you, last week of the month, their demand in the Bay Area goes up about 20 to 30% every month because people run out of money, and that's where they go. And when you go to these food banks, when you go to these handouts, what do you see? Families with kids. I saw many, and many of these families are highly educated people that are just not able to break through the continuing economic drought that we're in.
And if you're raising the minimum wage, that helps, but most people working minimum wage jobs are working multiple minimum wage jobs. You're working a job at McDonald's in the morning and a job at Burger King at night, or a job, you have to cobble them together, especially where we live. I mean, it's so expensive here, and minimum wage jobs aren't cutting it.
But there's so much talk about raising the minimum wage, but the flip side of that argument is that a lot of businesses are saying, look, if you do that, we can't stay in business. It will hurt job growth. It will hurt employment opportunities.
It's been a long contention, but most studies don't bear that out.
Well, in fact, San Francisco raised its minimum wage.
Years ago. So we have years of evidence. San Jose just raised a minimum wage, and there was a fight. The Chamber of Commerce often leads the fight in these the local municipalities when there's an issue that comes up. But in the end, it
job
turns
growth
out,
wasn't hurt.
Yeah, and people have more money in their pocket to actually spend, and we don't see down the line results, a high spike in crime, or more people go in the emergency room because they can't afford medical care.
And check this out. How serious is this $8 billion? Walmart is adjusting its future sales projection. Walmart, biggest retailer, adjusting it because they know that there's going to be less money coming into their doors because of the loss of food stamp money.
Here's something that can be done in the state of California. There's all this talk, of this California raising the minimum wage. Some cities are saying, okay, here's the state minimum. We're going to bump it up to our local standard. The state could tie the minimum wage to the inflation index so that the lowest earners actually get a bump as the price of milk or cereal or whatever they need to buy goes up. That's a concrete thing that the state could do that is not going to get done in Congress, at least not with the current makeup.
But given the ongoing class warfare, and I think a lot of people would agree that it is, and it especially plays out in San Francisco with the protests against the Google buses and the increasing resentment against high-tech workers. How do we resolve this? The gap is so wide, the resentment is so deep, and the issues are so profound and so complicated. You can vote in the minimum wage increase later this year and bring it up to $12 in 2016, like Ron Unz wants, but does that even begin to address the problem?
It's a piece of the puzzle. They also have to take care of housing. There's a housing shortage in San Francisco now, and people can't afford the housing that's there. It's going up. It's escalating much faster than their wages are escalating. It's a multi-piece.
And there's another, there's split roll. There's ideas that are in Sacramento that's being discussed. Something that's an older idea is split roll property taxes, where business pay a more significant portion of the taxes and generate more money for government to do things like, strengthen the safety net. These are there's a supermajority of Democrats in Sacramento that haven't yet taken on some of the bolder initiatives that have been talked about as being core income inequality measures that would address that.
Those are different Democrats. Those aren't liberal, progressive San Francisco Democrats. Lots of those are quote-unquote business Democrats who are the Chamber of Commerce helps elect a lot of the Democrats in Sacramento now. And Jerry Brown says, I don't want any new taxes, so you're not going to get a lot of help from him.
I have been to the unemployment office during the recession 100 times. I have done many, many stories on food banks and all that stuff, and I can tell you what I think is the worst thing. It's what Gandhi said. He says that poverty is the worst kind of violence. And what happens is, it's not so much of whether you're going to get an extra $5 or $10. The question is, do you have any hope? Do you have any confidence in the future? Or do you feel like you're going to be part of a permanent underclass, which then saps your ability to try to get out of it? And a lot of people find themselves in that position. Now, some people say, well, pick yourself by your bootstraps. Go down to 6th Street and take a look and see how many of those people can pick themselves up by their bootstraps. Go out to Antioch, go to Pittsburgh, go to many places in the Bay Area, and what you will find out is that poverty is the worst form of violence.
See, and you bring up really what the elephant in the room is, and this is what people are talking about every kitchen table is this the kind of society or city that we want, where there's a permanent underclass? Is this really what America is for us? And are kids going to do any better than what we did? And unless we address income inequality right now, while it's bad and it's getting worse, we won't be able to have a good answer to that question.
And it's probably going to be one of the biggest cultural and political issues to come in the next year or so. And California still has the highest poverty rate in the nation, 24%. We'll see how it all works out. Thank you so much, Aimee Allison, Joe Garofoli, and Tom Vacar. Coming up later in the program, plans to restore the San Joaquin River under fire as the drought persists. But first, next week, University of California President Janet Napolitano leads the U.S. delegation to the Winter Olympics in Sochi, Russia. As former Secretary of Homeland Security, Napolitano may be well suited to the job. The militant group claiming responsibility for a suicide bombing in December has threatened to attack again during the Olympics. In addition to Russia's decision to grant asylum to NSA leaker Edward Snowden, has increased tensions between the two countries. And so has Russia's stance against gay rights. The 10-member delegation representing the U.S. has 3 openly gay athletes, including tennis great Billie Jean King and skater Brian Boitano. Scott Shafer sat down earlier with UC President Janet Napolitano.
President Napolitano, welcome.
Thank you.
First of all, you are getting ready to go to Sochi for the Games. What are your thoughts as you prepare to leave?
I'm excited. I'm honored to be leading the U.S. official delegation. I'm fascinated by Sochi. I've never been there, so that will be interesting. And, I want to go there, represent my country, represent my university, represent the team.
You, I think, are the first non-president, vice president, or family member of the first family to head the delegation in about at least a decade, I know. Is there a message in that? And if so, what is it?
Well, I don't know, but I think, as the leader of the nation's largest public research university, where openness and tolerance and intellectual achievement are celebrated and practiced every day, I think going to the Olympics with the kind of delegation where you have athletes, you have openly gay athletes, you have leaders in public service, represents the diversity of America, I think that sends a powerful message too.
Do you see head of the delegation as part of your job in some way?
Well, I think wherever I go, I'm president of the University of California, so I don't segregate it out that much. It's a huge honor to be asked by the president to go, and I go as a person who is the president of the University of California.
The big issue that everyone's talking about ahead of the Games is security, and of course, you're former Secretary of Homeland Security for the United States. But what concerns do you have as both someone heading up our delegation and also as former secretary?
I think that all security precautions that can be taken are being taken in a world where there are no guarantees. I think that as the Games open and continue, the focus will shift, and I hope it shifts to where it should be, which is on these athletes and what they're able to do, whether they're skiing or skating or curling or what have you. So that's what I hope to see.
Is there any reason to think that, although yes, security has been a concern for many years, is there any reason to think that there are more risks this time around?
Well, that area of the world is a troubled area of the world. And we have seen attacks in areas near Sochi in recent weeks and months. My understanding and my view is that Sochi and the mountain environment will be probably the safest place in Russia during the pendency of the Games. So I have to rely on, and do rely on, that assurance, and also the assurance given to me by the United States about the safety of the Games.
As you mentioned, one of the messages, I think, of this delegation, there are 3 openly gay and lesbian athletes. Russia has some troubling policies about LGBT issues. I'm wondering, first of all, have you talked to the entire delegation? Have you talked specifically with, say, Billie Jean King, Brian Boitano, about that part of the symbolism of the U.S. delegation?
I haven't talked specifically about that, but I know that they are proud to go and proud to represent, and we are all proud to represent, the fact that the United States is a very open and tolerant society.
There's been some discussion that there should be some sort of outward symbolic either protest or show of support for LGBT rights. For example, an armband, a rainbow flag, that kind of thing. Is that appropriate?
My view is that we're going there for the athletes and for their performances, and I think that's where the focus ought to be. And I'm not sure this is an appropriate place or time for political protests of that sort.
One of the other issues, I mean, there's a lot of tension between the United States and Russia, and has been for well over the last couple of years, really. One of the issues, of course, is Edward Snowden, who has asylum, which has now been extended by the Russian government. How do you perceive him? Is he a traitor? Is he, some people say he's a whistleblower or even a hero. What's your take?
I've been very public about this in the past. I think that he has committed crimes, and I think that he should be extradited to the United States. So I'm not a Snowden fan.
Back to the Games, there are some 20 athletes, I think, from California that are going to be in Sochi. You're not one of them. But if you were, which event would you participate in?
If I were in the Games?
Yeah.
Oh, Lord. Well, this is going to sound funny, but I got into curling when I was in Vancouver, which is kind of like a bocce or shuffleboard on ice with brooms, and there's actually a fair amount of strategy involved in it. So, and I'm not particularly athletic myself. I'm not sure that I would be a good curler, but that would be kind of fun.
Beats the alternative.
It beats the alternative, yeah.
I thought either that or luge. That was fun.
Yeah, exactly. Luge would be fun, yeah.
Yeah, a little dangerous,
scary,
though, actually.
I was going to say, yeah, scary.
All right, President Napolitano, good luck in Sochi. Thanks so much. We'll look for you out there playing curling.
Thank you.
Despite a little rain this week, California is still on track for the worst drought in more than 100 years. And politicians on both sides of the aisle are pushing their agendas. Governor Jerry Brown is urging conservation and spoke with President Obama about the impact of the drought. Central Valley lawmakers proposed legislation to pump more water from the Delta for farmers and halt a major river restoration project that's been in the works since 2009. Spencer Michaels has our report.
This is the once mighty San Joaquin River, and much of it has been like this, dry as toast, since the 1940s. That's when the federal government constructed Friant Dam near Fresno, which impounded the San Joaquin's water in a large reservoir so it could be diverted through a vast network of canals to farms and ranches in the San Joaquin Valley, leaving some sections of the river wet, some dry. Today, the valley is one of the most productive agricultural areas in the world, but the fish are gone and the river is a ghost of its former self. Before the dam, the water began high in the Sierra Nevada mountains and flowed west through the Central Valley and eventually out through San Francisco Bay to the Pacific Ocean. For the past 5 years, a controversial plan to restore 153 miles of California's second longest river has been getting underway. The survival of salmon that used to come up the river from the Pacific Ocean is a crucial reason for restoring the river. Gerald Hattler works for California Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Before significant development, we probably had runs on the San Joaquin in excess of 500,000 fish.
500,000 salmon?
Yes.
And what is it now?
That population is what we call extirpated, which basically means the population is extinct.
Hattler and fish biologists are trying to figure out how to bring the salmon back to the river, which means bringing back the river itself. 20 years ago, the Natural Resources Defense Council filed suit against the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, claiming endangered fish populations downstream from Friant must be protected under the law. Also at risk was the livelihood of salmon fishermen along the coast. Monty Schmidt is a senior scientist with the NRDC.
The San Joaquin River is a really important resource for the entire state of California. It'll improve water quality downstream, and it restores a living river that future generations will get to enjoy.
But ranchers throughout the valley had come to depend on the water diverted from the river. Gary Bursey farms almonds and wine grapes. He feared a reduction in his water supply could hurt his production. And for what?
We in ag, we always had our suspicions. Do you put 400 or 500 salmon in front of the food and fiber for our country?
But in 2006, Bursey and other farmers, fearing the courts could take even more water, agreed to settle the lawsuit and allow the river to be restored. It was a compromise, says Ronald Jacobsma, who runs the Friant Water Users Authority, representing 15,000 farmers.
Our concern was if we left this in the hands of a federal judge, this could be far worse. The uncertainty, the risk became a bit too much for our folks. We couldn't afford to lose half of our water supply.
Last spring, the first actual moves toward restoring the fish population began, when more water was released from the dam and scientists experimentally put some salmon into the river for the first time to watch how they behave and where they go. Those are small steps. Most of the money spent thus far, 7 years after the agreement, has been on plans and research, which doesn't impress Canon Michael, who farms a variety of crops near the river.
To date, not one shovel of dirt has been turned. There's been over $100 million of money that's been spent. And I know there has to be a lot of studies, but $100 million is a lot of money, and to not show really one physical result for it is a big challenge.
The settlement acknowledges that fixing the river will take much more money than that. A small dam that diverts water into irrigation canals needs replacing. Fish screens and ladders need to be designed and tested. Bypasses must be constructed, and some water may be pumped upstream for reuse, projects that could cost $2 billion, mostly federal money. Both sides worry that Congress won't appropriate enough money for future work, although it has authorized the restoration.
The problem with federal appropriations is you can't predict what the federal government will appropriate next year or the year after.
And without the funding to do the large-scale projects, the river isn't going to function the way that the settlement envisioned it.
Now, in the midst of a severe drought, some Central Valley lawmakers are trying to halt restoration of the San Joaquin River. It's part of a bill introduced this week by Republican Congressman Devin Nunes.
And remember what this water is being dumped for. It's being dumped for what I call phantom salmon. The salmon don't exist.
Nunes got support from House Speaker John Boehner, who said he'll bring the legislation to a vote.
How you can favor fish over people is something that people in my part of the world would never understand.
But the bill is expected to die in the Senate. Senator Dianne Feinstein called the Republican drought bill irresponsible and plans to introduce her own legislation soon. Restoration work on the San Joaquin River is continuing slowly. For now, it remains impossible for salmon to swim the length of the San Joaquin River and spawn. But a few fish are living in the river and are reproducing. Still, even if the project overcomes drought-inspired opposition, it may take another 20 years before the restoration of the San Joaquin can be judged a success or a failure.
And that story was produced in partnership with the PBS NewsHour. Joining me now for a look at other stories we're watching is Scott Shafer. Hi, Scott.
Hey, Twee.
Well, when you were talking to Janet Napolitano earlier this week, the state Senate was approving a ballot measure that will go before voters, repealing parts of Prop 209. That's the measure the law that bans gender and race-based preferences in government hiring and in college admissions. Did you get a chance to ask Ms. Napolitano about that?
You know, we didn't find out that the Senate had passed that until we were done with the interview. I emailed her office and they said she wasn't quite ready to comment yet. I'm sure they didn't want her to do or say anything that's going to detract from her trip to Sochi and the Olympics, but I'm sure that they will support it. The university has really struggled to keep the student body diverse, especially at places like UCLA and Berkeley. So I'd be very surprised if the university did not come out in support of a ballot measure, and it probably won't be on the ballot anyway till November of 2016.
Okay, but another ballot measure that people have been talking about and that San Jose Mayor Chuck Reed was hoping to get on this year's ballot in 2014 regarding pension reform. It seems like there's now a bump with that. What's happening?
Well, they got cleared to begin collecting signatures, and in order to do that, the Attorney General puts its title summary on and ballot title, and they don't like what she did. They don't like the title summary. They think it's inaccurate. It's also slightly skewed, I think, toward the union point of view, which would not be favorable to their measure. So they're going to file a lawsuit probably next week challenging the language of the title and summary. That's going to take a few weeks, and so it cuts off time that they would need to collect signatures and time to get it on the ballot for this November. So more likely it would be on in 2016, which isn't good for them because it would be a presidential year, a much bigger turnout.
And speaking of the president and presidential years, First Lady Michelle Obama was in the Bay Area. She's been here for 2 days. Really no public events that are accessible to people who don't have a lot of money to give to the campaign.
These were all events for high rollers, and there was some criticism for that. But you know, the First Lady and the First Family really have been very visible in some of the lower income neighborhoods of Washington, D.C., so it's not like they're hiding from the public. Hard to blame them. Last time the president was in town, you may recall too, there were some very visible protests about his immigration policy, so they might have been wanting to avoid some of that as well.
And just very quickly, Henry Waxman, another senior congressman, retiring. This on the heels of George Miller saying he's retiring.
Huge loss. Between the two of them, they have 80 years in Congress, and they're both retiring after this term, so it's a big loss of clout for the California congressional delegation.
And we'll see who fills their shoes. Scott, thank you.
You bet.
And for all of KQED's news coverage, please go to kqednews.org.
I'm Scott Shafer. Thanks for joining us.
And I'm Tui Vu. Have a good night.